Welcome back to the Viking Update Show. Usually it's me and John Krasinski. Wanted to bring on Kevin Seifert this week, in part to give John a break. He's doing so much work on the Timberwolves. Also because I love to have Kevin on the show. We had our friend Mark Craig on last week's show. So you are getting a lot of football wisdom here these last couple of weeks. Mark and Kevin, among the few people in the market who've been covering the NFL for a long time and with distinction. Kevin not only covers the Vikings, he's also done a lot of work on officiating rules. He knows a lot of things that a lot of people don't really get into. So we can have a very interesting conversation here. Again, this is the Viking Update Show, part of TalkNorth.com. If you like the show, please subscribe at your favorite podcast app. It's free. It's the easiest way to listen. Also, you can hear Jeff Diamond's Vikings and NFL Insider at TalkNorth.com. We're coming to you from the Aquarius Home Services Studios. We want to thank Aquarius, Twill in the Edina Galleria, and TSR Injury Law, 612 TSR Time. All right, Kevin. So before we get into the obvious Vikings topics, let's talk about the changing kickoff rule. Because, I mean, I think it confused a lot of people. I think some people might even be confused why there are these rule changes to begin with. I know you've looked a lot into it. Why don't you just take it away? Tell me about why they changed the kickoff rule and how it's going to affect the game.
Yeah, so I guess the first thing I would say is if you take a step back, and this is coming from people within the league, the rule changes that they applied to the kickoff this year probably makes, in total, the most significant rule changes to any particular play that we've seen in our lifetime in the NFL. It's going to be that different. Rich McKay, who was the competition committee chairman, has been on it for almost 30 years, said that the only thing that compares in terms of how the game is going to be different is when they instituted replay for the final time. You know, they went back and forth a few times, but they finally instituted it permanently. And that's the level of change that has happened here. And basically what the situation was is that they were finding that concussions, injuries of all kinds, but especially concussions, were happening at a higher rate on kickoffs and kickoff returns than on any other play in the NFL by far. And this is going back to the early 2000s when they were seeing that happen. So they started realizing that people were much more aware of concussions. It was something that was becoming a very public level of discussion. They had to do something about it. And the only thing that they could really think of is to try to reduce the number of kickoffs. So if you had, or kickoff returns, if you had fewer kickoff returns, then by definition, you would have fewer concussions on those kickoff plays. And so they started coming up with rules that would incentivize teams to either not return the ball or for teams to just kick touchbacks. And gradually over time, they kept changing rules to the point where it went from, in like 2009 or 2010, I think 80% of kickoffs were returned, to last year where less than 20% of kickoffs were returned. And so you basically had a dead play. People have always been worried about getting rid of the kickoff. Well, they essentially had gotten rid of it by the end of last year. And I think there were no returns in the Super Bowl at all. And so that really stuck in the craw of a lot of people around the NFL. And they realized that you either have to just not have a kickoff at all, just spot the ball at the 25 and start offenses after scoring, or do something dramatic. And so they had been watching for a few years what the XFL introduced in 2020, and then adjusted a little bit in 2023 when they had their season return to the field and had their season last year. And they liked it because what the XFL had done was create a kickoff structure that eliminated the high-speed collisions that were causing concussions, but also almost guaranteed a return. And the problem was it looked really funky, and it was a lot different than anything that anyone who had ever been involved in the NFL or college football or high school football or youth football had ever seen. And the idea was that instead of having everybody run down the field after the ball is kicked, just have all those people start the play downfield so that they don't get up to these speeds that cause these high-speed collisions. So what the NFL changed some things about the way the XFL did it, but what they came up with is that everybody would line up, except for the kicker and one or two returners, 25 yards downfield from where the kickoff was coming, from that 35-yard line. and they would basically already be in position to start either blocking or covering and not have to run to it. And what it sort of leads to is more of a running play where people are blocking each other and trying to get off of blocks to get the returner, as opposed to just mass chaos and violent collisions. And so they also altered some rules. We can get into as much detail as you want, but in terms of what happens if you kick a touchback, they try to disincentivize that. And what happened if you tried to take a knee and not return it? They try to disincentivize that. They try to disincentivize those pop-up kicks that make it hard to get any returns off of. And so, long story short, we're expecting the kickoff to be returned at least 50 or 60% of the time this year, if not more. And that would be a dramatic change, not only over last year, but really the past decade or so.
I think it's fascinating. And by the way, Kevin Seifert covered the Vikings for the Star Tribune. He's covered baseball before. He's done a lot of work on officiating and rules. Now he works for ESPN.com, covers the Vikings, but also has an interest in things like this. I love it, Kevin. I think this is exactly the right. I'm glad they didn't eliminate the kickoff, but I understood that the kickoff was becoming more of a ceremonial moment than an actual play. I love the fact that they're conscious of player safety and yet not wanting to take this and just throw it out the window. So I'm in favor of it. Do you have an opinion on what they've done?
Yeah, I think it's long overdue, frankly. And this was like 2020. It doesn't seem that long ago, but it was 4 years ago. And the XFL had a relative skeleton staff of people who were smart. Oliver Luck was in charge of that, that league at that time, and he's really smart and has a lot of football background, and he hired a lot of smart young football people. But this was something that a small group of relatively inexperienced people came together to think through and came up with a really smart, creative solution, and didn't worry about what the aesthetics of it would be or worry about what the public reaction would be. And the NFL just kind of sat there and watched and waited to see it tested out by someone else. So you would like to see the NFL be the leaders in the innovation and apply their considerable resources and obvious talent level they have. I mean, the special teams coaches in the NFL and the front office people in the NFL are the smartest football people out there. And so, but they sort of chose to let somebody else do the innovation. And so that meant that they went through a lot of seasons of essentially really bad kickoff plays as they waited for the XFL and the USFL and the UFL to test all that stuff out. But that said, I'm very happy that they're doing it. I do think that once the preseason starts, because that'll really be where fans see it the first time, there's going to be a lot of fans, unless those fans happen to be big XFL fans who watched those games. They're going to be surprised at what it looks like, and it'll take some adjustment. But I don't know any fans that were out there saying they didn't like the kickoff and they don't want it anyway and we should just get rid of it. The fans and media and players and coaches all just wanted it to be a real play. They didn't want it to be a waste of anybody's time. And so I think that they have accomplished that. They did water it down a little bit. Initially, if you look at the XFL, there was like 90+% returns. And the reason the NFL is projecting 50 or 60% returns this year is they did water it down a little bit because coaches still want to have the option to kick touchbacks for strategy reasons. And we'll see how often they do that or not. And didn't want to be penalized too much for doing that. But, just when a kickoff is returned for a touchdown or even just breaks the line and they get to the midfield, I mean, that's one of the most exciting plays in the game. And I'm glad, and it's long overdue, that they found a way to, I think, ensure that all that can happen without the injury rates being any higher than any other play in football.
Right. Brandon Morton is our producer. I recommend checking out John Krasinski's shows on the Timberwolves. We had Governor Walz on earlier this week. We have Russo on hockey, Jeff Diamond on football. myself, Roy Smalley, Lavelle Neal on baseball. Dawn Mitchell's show has been great. She has an Aurora player on this week. We also talk about the PWHL champions. Check it all out at talknorth.com. We do appreciate it. How do you think NFL teams adjust their rosters under these circumstances? Does it become less important to have specialists on who are special teams coverage, or do you have more just normal players who are going out there because there's less risk of injury, or is there a skill set that they need to develop in their special teamers to take advantage of these rules?
That's something that's actually interesting, and it's what teams are looking at right now as they go through these OTAs, and eventually they'll be in mini camps next week and the following week, and finally in training camp, to see what type of bodies. First of all, like, are offensive linemen going to be more likely to be out there now that there's less running and more blocking, inline blocking happening? There used to be, when you and I first started covering football, there would be 2 or 3 offensive linemen lined up, and they would form those wedges to block kickoff returns, but they can't. Those are no longer allowed for safety reasons. But if you're going to basically have a play that's like a lot of like a zone run play in terms of blocking, and have the returner run behind that, then maybe you're going to have more offensive linemen. So I don't think they need to find people with different skills, but they might need to rebalance their rosters and have a few more backup offensive linemen and maybe a few less backup safeties or linebackers who used to be the guys that would be running down the field. I think they'll also need to take more seriously who the returners are going to be, because you're going to go from returning 2 out of every 10 kickoffs to returning 5 or 6 out of every 10 kickoffs, and you want those guys to be threats. And it's possible that those guys will be more likely to be running back types than receiver types. I know Cordero Patterson is a guy in and of itself, but if the idea is going to be that sort of need to follow blocks and be less about just frontline speed, your returners might have more of a running back profile. And I say returners plural because I think most teams are going to end up with 2 guys back there. And again, that's something you and I used to see when we first started covering football, is having 2 guys back there, or even before we started covering it in the 80s, at least for me. Because you as a return team don't want to let the ball roll into the end zone, because if you don't pick it up before that point, it's going to be spotted at the 20. And so teams will try to kick them away from you if you only have the 1 returner. So you're probably going to have 2, and most teams probably already have guys like that on their roster, and they just, like, take the Vikings, for example. They have Kene Nwangu and Ty Chandler, and they probably would plug 2 guys like that in there, and they'd be okay. But not every team might have 2 people they want to put back there, so they have to make sure that they have that in their final 53-man roster configuration. An interesting thing was said today by the Chiefs special teams coach, Dave Taub, that they might not use their frontline kicker on kickoffs because there's so many more returns that if you go back to the days when there were a lot of returns, kickers used to get involved in a lot of the tackles, and he had the percentages of it, and they don't want to, their field goal kicker, Harrison Butker, is very accurate, and he's also their kickoff guy, and they don't want to risk losing him to injury on covering a kickoff. And so they might use a position player they have named Justin Reed, who happens to have a rare combination of skills as a safety and a kicker, and use him as the kickoff kicker, because he can be a true cover guy, and it's less likely to get hurt if he's involved in the tackle. And so there's all those different kinds of thoughts going on right now, and experiments happening right now in the spring, which is where these things typically happen, and they probably will extend it in training camp as well.
Fascinating stuff. I actually have a thought I want to bring up to you about kickers and their usage. I also want to get your thoughts on some of the obvious big Viking stories that have come down in the last couple of months. First, though, we do want to thank Aquarius Home Services.
Scott for Aquarius Home Services. Making your life better is a huge priority for us at Aquarius. It may start with providing worry-free water or heating and cooling systems you can trust, but there's another very important reason. Aquarius is family-owned and operated. We work hard to earn the right to be recommended. That means upfront, no-surprise pricing, providing a 5-star experience, and treating your home and time with respect. And knowing we're just a click away at AquariusHomeservices.com.
Also want to tell you about Twill in the Edina Galleria, my favorite men's clothing store. Scott Dayton is the owner. He's in the shop. He's always in there talking sports and clothes. He goes around the world looking for the best possible brands for his shop. This is not a chain. This is not a department store. This is what they do. They specialize in men's clothes. I've been traveling a lot lately, and everything I pack with me is Twill stuff because it wears so well. It comes out of the suitcase unwrinkled. It's comfortable. And now they've added Samuelson to their family of brands. They have golf stuff, great gift ideas, and they have tons of accessories, not just clothes, shoes, everything else for golf, for summer wear, for graduation parties, for graduations. And as I always say, I have everything I have in my wardrobe, from my favorite golf shorts to my best suit, I got at Twill. TwillMN.com. Sign up for email updates. They will not spam you to death. They'll just let you know when they're having events. And when they have events, they're usually really good sales on stuff that will last you the rest of your life.
True Vision Institute in Bloomington. I was there earlier this week to get a consultation for LASIK surgery. Found out I'm a great candidate for it, and super easy to set up an appointment. Go in there. They run you through a bunch of tests. Their people are very nice, and they will give you a straight up and honest answer for your options for your vision correction. And I'm looking forward to having LASIK at True Vision once the playoffs are over. So go to truevision.com to set up your appointment, and you won't be disappointed at all. Great people at True Vision.
Thanks also to TSR Injury Law, 612-TSR-TIME. You know the deal. If you're injured, call 612-TSR-TIME. They will not charge you unless they win your case, and they win a lot of cases. That's why you see Steve Terry's face everywhere these days. All right, my thought, if we want to be innovative in the NFL, Kevin, is I would like to see kickers used less, place kickers used less. I think that end of game, end of half situations where a team's trying to drive down the field, I think that's a lot of fun. You're trying to figure out how far can you get, how far should you try to get to set up your field goal kicker for a potential game winner or a game tire. But the situation where you're on the other team's 25-yard line is 4th and 3, and you decide to kick a field goal instead of going for it, I would like to see some way to discourage the bailout, kick the field goal in the middle of the second quarter type play. I wish there were a way to incentivize going for it, or limit the times you can use a place kicker.
Well, maybe it'll just be the evolution of analytics that would save us there, because I agree it's much more interesting to watch somebody go for it on 4th and 2 or 4th and 3 from the 25 than to watch a kicker kick a relatively easy field goal there. And we all see the percentages and what makes the most sense. And as offenses continue to get stronger and stronger, and the NFL continues to focus and incentivize offense, then hopefully, as the generations of coaches go by, more and more buy into the fact that, you've got, if you can convert that 4th down, you're setting yourself up for a much better chance to win by continuing to drive for a touchdown than you are by kicking the field goal. And so, I don't know if they'll ever have a way to get people to avoid kicking a field goal on 4th and 8 from the 35 or something like that. But you wonder, the interesting thing is how kickers have gotten so much better. And you're seeing this even in the UFL now, of kicking 50 and 60-yard field goals. I mean, in the previous generation, if you kicked a 45 or 47-yard field goal, that was a dramatic, great kick and not likely to happen very often. And now we're seeing people trot it out for 60-yard field goals pretty frequently, and not just in domes or off of turf, but in all different kinds of surfaces and conditions. And so it's almost like in basketball, when the three-pointer first came out and you started seeing teams have essentially 3-point specialists that really didn't do much except come in and shoot 3-pointers. And so you wonder if the future of kicking field goals, except in at the very end of games or halves and winning situations is offenses go for it on fourth and relatively makeable, except when you can steal 3 points by bringing in a specialist to kick a 50-plus yard field goal. And so that is an interesting kind of thing to keep in mind for the future of the game, and not necessarily created by rules, but just by the evolution of analytics and the evolution of offense and the continued improvement of kickers to the point where, again, a 60-yard field goal isn't a prayer anymore.
Yeah, it's funny. I was, spending a lot of time in the NBA lately. Somebody pointed out to me that one of the first All-Star games, NBA All-Star games, after the institution of the 3-point line, I think the teams went combined like 0 for 5 or something. I mean, they didn't even try. They didn't even try, and when they did, they weren't good at it. And now you see guys shooting fall away 28-footers without thinking about it. It's amazing how much it has evolved. You and I haven't talked since the draft, so just give me your big picture view of the Vikings. Where do you see the quarterback competition going? Do you think the Vikings have a chance to win this year, or this is more of a rebuilding and getting McCarthy set up type of year? Where do you think this franchise is right now?
Yeah, it's weird because I think my expectation for them this year is not much different than what it was at the start of last year. And that was that they had a good enough team to compete, to be around 500 on either side of 500, which makes you a playoff contender. Because I do think they have enough, even with the quarterback transition, I do think they have enough talent defensively, especially, and then with the skill positions on offense to have that kind of record. And last year they ended up losing Cousins and going 7-10. And that was considered a severe disappointment. If they go in this year where they're in a quarterback transition, if they go 8-9, 9-8 in that area, that's a huge, exciting, optimistic, inducing win of a season. And so the expectations are similar, but the reaction to the outcome, I think, will be much different given what they put themselves through at quarterback. And, in terms of the quarterback, the way I view this is I really, am taking them at their word that Sam Darnold is here for a reason, and that his job is to play well enough and be credible enough in terms of giving them a chance to win, that they don't have to play J.J. McCarthy until he's ready. Because they've done plenty of studies, and you don't need to do a study to know how much damage you can do to the future of a young quarterback by putting him on the field before he's ready. And it doesn't mean that the second he does step on the field under that scenario that he'll hit the ground running and be great and won't make any mistakes. It's just there's a line that if you aren't at least above that line and you can't protect yourself and your brain just can't process yet to the point where you have to give yourself a chance to be successful, you really risk physical injury, obviously, but also psychological and confidence harm. And we saw that really with Jaron Hall last year in the Green Bay game. I think that is an example of a player who was playing before he was even at the line of sustainability. And so for that reason, I think Sam Darnold is going to have a big impact on this year, one way or the other. He's either going to play the best football he's ever played and give them a chance to compete in a way that doesn't make them feel pressure to put J.J. McCarthy on the field. Or if he can't do that, they'll be in a position of having to decide whether to break all sort of the rules that they've established for themselves on J.J. McCarthy's development because they don't have any other choice. And so that to me is one of the most interesting sort of scenarios going on. And this season, eventually J.J. McCarthy will be the quarterback. There's no doubt about it. But when and how are going to be really interesting to follow.
Yeah, I thought that, I think the interesting thing about Darnold is I think he's in that class of quarterbacks who might give you a good month or might even give you 2 good months in the right circumstances. I think eventually he goes back to being Sam Darnold, but it's like I think when he started with Carolina a few years ago, I can't remember which year it was, he actually got him off to a really good start, and it wasn't that good a team. So I could see Darnold keeping them competitive for a while. What do you think about J.J. McCarthy's readiness? You've seen him at camp, you've seen his arm strength, and seen him move around an NFL field now. Do you have any updated impression on him?
It doesn't. The biggest thing is, and maybe this is just being at Michigan, or maybe it's him being like he was just always a very high profile prospect. I think he spent his senior year at the IMG Academy in high school, then went straight to Michigan. It does not appear too big for him. Like just the idea of being an NFL quarterback, and that might sound like faint praise, but it's part of it. Like realizing that like you are the center of attention every minute of every day, and he seems to not, I don't know, but crave it or not, but certainly be comfortable in it, and that's a start. And so he's got some good coaching around him. He's got, especially talking to Josh McCown this week. Josh McCown can reach back into lots of different situations he was in as a quarterback who struggled more than he succeeded, frankly, and give him some real world advice that not only he experienced, but also that he witnessed from all the other players that he played with over that long career. And so, and Josh McCown being the quarterback's coach, of course. And so I think he, all's good so far. Like I hate to judge based on how I see him throw a half speed throw, in a 7-on-7 and drill in the spring. But what I can, be pretty confident about is that he appears to be up for this moment. And for the role that he's going to eventually be asked to do from a personality standpoint, from a confidence standpoint, from a intellectual standpoint, and but it ultimately will we won't know until we see how he responds when it's live. Whether that's preseason games or regular season games, and under the pressure we over the years, Jim, and you know this too, we've seen a lot of quarterbacks that look good on the practice field in 7-on-7 or walking through the locker room or talking at a press conference, but when things got heated on the field in critical moments, weren't able to function well enough. And so he's got the tools to be prepared to do that, and the people around him to prepare him to do it. And we'll find out whenever he gets that chance.
How about your initial impression of Dallas Turner, at least seeing him in person?
Yeah, he's it's in like he's a guy that had the Vikings not drafted a quarterback, we'd be talking about every minute of every day, because they use more draft capital to get him than they have used for any player in the history of the franchise. I mean, it's like 7 draft picks, and the equivalent of basically the value of the number 1 overall pick. And so this guy, he better be really good. And in listening to Christian Darrisaw yesterday, he's had to go up against him a little bit, and he's watched him go up against people, other people on the line as well. And he said that Dallas Turner ripped off a spin move the other day that was faster and more forceful than anything he ever saw from Daniil Hunter. And that was pretty high praise.
Yes.
And again, a 7-on-7 type situation, but there's some freakish athletic things about him, running a 4.4, having these, he's not that tall per se, but he's got really long arms. And so it's hard for an offensive lineman to get into him, if that makes sense, and to block him in that way. And so, but having that speed and having that build, and having Brian Flores as defensive coordinator, like we'll see him a lot on the edge, but we'll see him in other places too. And he's going to get a lot of chances to make plays. And I'm really excited to see not so much what he does necessarily as an edge rusher, because I do think he'll be pretty good, but to see what else they can come up with. It's just fun to watch, people's brains working. And I know that's what is happening with Brian Flores. And he compared him to Dante Hightower, who he had in New England, who people won't necessarily remember as this like huge numbers producing pass rusher, but he was a guy that they used all over the field, and just wherever he went caused trouble, and during, I think, 3 of their Super Bowls that they won, he was involved in on defense. And so it's just from watching things be innovated, watching new ideas come to life. That's what I'm excited to see with how the Vikings use Dallas Turner. But from everything I can see, like the sky's the limit in terms of his potential impact on a game.
Flores is going to be, it's really going to be interesting to watch Flores because, I didn't think they could afford to lose to Danielle Hunter, but then they draft a guy in the first round who might be, as useful as Danielle Hunter, even if he's not as accomplished. They've added a bunch of pass rushers now. Is this defense potentially better than last year's, even with Hunter gone?
I think it's potentially deeper, and ultimately that was the issue that they faced. They had a really nice run once they figured out and fine-tuned the scheme that they were going to use about week 3 or 4 last year. They went about 10 weeks where they were maybe the NFL's, in the top 3 of all defenses in the league for a long period of time before they had some injuries. And then when other guys had to play, they just didn't have the horses anymore to keep doing what they had been doing. And so I think part of what this process was of signing all these players, defensive players in free agency, was just getting more bodies that they felt comfortable using in the ways that Brian Flores might potentially use them, and then play them off of each other than they had last year. And so, you look at it from a big picture and you say, there's no Danielle Hunter type player yet on this team that if you're the opposing offensive coordinator, you say, that's the guy we have to focus on. That's where we're turning our blocking to. That's who we have to make sure doesn't beat us. There's not that single player that has that identity yet. Maybe by the end of the year, that'll be Dallas Turner or Jonathan Grenard or someone else. But there's a lot of people who, if they're used in the right way, can make some plays that will change the outcome of games. And so I think they have a deeper group. I don't know if they necessarily have a better starting 11 per se, but definitely deeper.
Good stuff, Kevin. I appreciate you joining us. For Kevin Seifert, our producer, Brandon Morton, I'm Jim Souhan. This is TalkNorth.com. Again, check out all the other shows at TalkNorth.com, sports, variety, and outdoors. If you like a show, please subscribe to it. And for all of us at TalkNorth.com, thanks for listening.